If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, as January 20th looms and the inauguration of Jim Crow Joe draws ever closer, we have the white media attempting to make us forget about his 50-plus years of racism and to tell us that, well, black folks are fine and hunky-dory with what's going on now. Why? Black people are flexing their muscles by putting an unrepentant white supremacist and his Asian cohort into the White House. Apparently, this is black folks flexing their muscles. While the white media is willing to report on the impact of black voters on the election, as if we didn't know that, what they haven't been doing is mentioning Joe Biden's Zoom call, because apparently that needs to fall down the memory hole. We need people to forget about that. And so the white media is beginning the process of bombarding us with all kinds of feel-good propaganda, saying that black voters flexing their muscles and they want President Biden to take a cue from candidate Biden, but at no point do they ever say what it is that the real black agenda and its demands are. They talk all around it. Basically what they're saying is Joe Biden is already doing what black people want. Why? He's listening. That's the old Obama deflection. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. We don't need these bastards to hear us. We need them to obey us. What the white media is attempting to do is to put in place the old turnaround. They're trying to turn us around backwards so we can go back to the bad old days. They're trying to prop up the same old fakers, frauds, phonies, and fools, the pork chop preachers, the pulpit pimps, and such. And the reason why is that as black people, we have demonstrated for over a century and a half that if there's one thing that black people can be counted on to really appreciate, it's to have somebody put on a show. We like to have one of our hand-picked Negroes, well, one of white supremacy's hand-picked Negroes, who gets in front of black folks and tells us it's time to show up and show out and all that garbage. We love having the class clown entertaining us and playing along with his foolish antics. We've demonstrated that on too many occasions. So white supremacy's trying to test the waters. Okay, we saw how you guys were flexing on us before, and the usual assortment of our bootlicks didn't do much. So that being the case, we got to find a way to get you back on board with the old system. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be rehabilitating the image of all of our hand-picked puppets. We're going to be rehabilitating their image. The pork chop preachers hopefully will be given a new lease on life, along with the activist and sorority fraternity nobodies, you know, the usual suspects. This is about by degrees, step by step, trying to edge us back toward the bad old days. They're trying to reinstall their bootlicks and flunkies and get us to think that this was all our idea. They're trying to redefine what counts as black empowerment, what counts as black progress, because we have snatched the narrative from them. So we're going to go ahead and expose them. The first example that we're going to go to happens to come from our old pals over at the New York Times. Black voters want President Biden to take a cue from candidate Biden. No, we don't, because we didn't approve of either one of them. Candidate Biden is the problem because he's no different than Senator Biden. But that's not what this is about. What this is about is we're going to do some image management. We're going to go ahead and put some trusted Negro preacher. Yeah. We know these guys have absolutely no influence on the street, but that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to show that, well, this is the only representation with Joe Biden you're going to get. This is the only person who's going to be talking to him. Well, that doesn't matter. We don't listen to Biden, and we're not listening to these pork chop preachers either. The thing is, they're supposed to be listening to us. Now, the first person who they talk about is somebody, one of these pork chop pastors, Reverend Isaac Holt in South Carolina. Okay, so this is supposed to be Negro Jim Clyburn's front yard. And apparently Reverend Holt told then candidate Biden, "You're going to win." Really? So this is about Joe Biden winning. It ain't about black folks winning. It's about Joe Biden winning. Give me a break. With this puff piece here, it's supposed to be pretending to speak to our discontent and the fact that we see through this guy and we see through the Democratic con game that he represents. We see through this guy, but the whole point of the piece is to basically say black people, they're wagging their finger at Biden and Biden's taking it seriously and he knows. But even then, it's a matter of the entire purpose of publishing this was to turn us around and get us to understand, well, whatever you're expecting from Biden, you should lower those expectations. Talking about black political discontent means nothing without making it clear that that discontent carries consequences. We are not looking for yet another pithy summation of our complete and thorough disillusionment, frustration, and anger with these political prostitutes who keep demanding our vote and then turning around and slapping us in the face. We're not looking for somebody to do yet another summation of that. But that's all the New York Slimes was offering up here. In South Carolina, the piece says, the state that helped propel Mr. Biden to the Democratic nomination and where about half of the Democratic electorate is black, voters complain of receiving campaign promises from politicians while they are running but not being prioritized once they are elected. That is not news, family. Ain't nothing new here. And a doggone thing. Is that supposed to be some sort of surprise? Am I supposed to look and say, finally, they're saying it? They're forced to say it. What they're not saying is that Joe Biden will be punished. That they are not saying. He's going to be politically punished for defying the black agenda. That they do not say. The piece continues, there are similar grievances among voters in cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia, hubs of general election campaigning in key swing states who have grown used to the silence that follows presidential election years. Now, he didn't have to stop with Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia. You find any black enclave in America, you're going to be finding this. The piece then goes on to say, in their telling, attention quickly shifts to midterm races in gerrymandered Republican-leaning congressional districts, and the black voters who helped Democrats ascend to the White House are sometimes discarded. Their issues are too divisive. Their needs are too great. Okay, now while it is accurate to say that attention quickly shifts to midterm races, and that they start trying to figure out how to get those Republican votes, because this is a long-term project that's been going on, trying to find a way to neutralize the black vote. Because the thing about it is, if black folks start acting in their own personal interest and say we're going for self, then it becomes a matter of they're going to destabilize everything. So what you need is a population counterweight, or rather a number of population counterweights. Don't just put all your eggs in one basket. You need some casual racists, read white moderates. You can bring in some immigrants, preferably non-white immigrants who come from cultures that are blatantly, stridently anti-black. Fortunately, there's one just to the south of the United States. You go ahead and bring them in. You try to swamp black people with all of these populations and groups who are hostile toward them so that you can have rhetorical and political cover as you try to drown black people and their interests out of existence. That's what's going on here, a long-term project to do that. But the guy who wrote this said that black voters are sometimes discarded. You name one damn time that black people have not been discarded, have not been pushed to the side and marginalized. Name one election where black people's concerns were put front and center after the poll made it into the elected office. You name one election where black people actually got what we demanded. Name one. We are not sometimes discarded. We are always discarded. This is not some sometimes on again, off again thing. This is standard operating procedure. So that's what it means. This piece here is meant to subtly imply that, well, black people get what they want. Sometimes they're sometimes discarded. They are sometimes ignored, sometimes marginalized. This is a subtle form of minimizing our grievances. That's what this is about. That's what this piece is written for. It's meant to pay seeming lip service to our outrage and anger, but it's mostly meant to try to minimize it and say, well, it's not really as serious as all that. And this is going to intensify, by the way. The white media is going to be going all in on that particular rhetorical point, that black people's concerns are no more severe, no more pressing, no more urgent than any other constituency. It's no more urgent than transgender bathrooms. Black people being murdered in the streets, that's no more important than transgender bathrooms. Hence, it's also no more vital, it's not more pressing than anyone else's concerns. So ignoring black people's concerns doesn't really matter because their concerns are no more important than anyone else's. That's what white media pieces like this are meant to lay the groundwork for. You're going to be hearing that hard and heavy in the months and years ahead. The New York Times puff piece says that Mr. Biden has insisted that this time will be different, and people like Mr. Holt are taking him at his word. Now, has Reverend Holt said what it is that convinces him that Biden's going to be different than he's been for the last freaking 50 years? You're taking Biden at his word? What word? Biden has not pledged to do anything for black people. When did Biden say what he was going to do for black folks? We said defund the police. He said, I'm not doing that. I'm going to give $300 million to the police. We said reparations. Joe Biden said, what the hell is that? Reparations for what? And Kamala Harris said, you think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? No! So Mr. Holt's taking Biden at his word? Well, Biden has not given any word except for he's going to do everything we told him not to do. We told him defund the police. He said, I'm giving him more money. We said reparations. He says nothing. But you see, that's what the white media is doing here. They're trying to use this pork chop preacher as being some sort of avatar for us. Some pulpit pimp says that he's going to take Biden at his word. Yeah, because Biden's done so good by black people up until now, right? Now, it was at this point that the New York Times does what the white media is going to be beating the drum for. This is where they do the pivot. They pretend as if they're saying black people are discontent. And well, what are they discontent about? They want to make sure that their interests are heard. They want to make sure that black people's political priorities are front and center. Well, what are those black political priorities? Well, let the New York Times, a white-owned, white-run newspaper, tell you what black people really are concerned about. As the piece goes on to say, Mr. Biden said, you've always had my back and I'll have yours. But who defines political priorities for black voters, and what does it mean to have their back? Leading black politicians, civil rights leaders, activists, and many of the same South Carolina church leaders Mr. Biden leaned on to turn his campaign around all said in interviews that it was important to address the coronavirus pandemic. The coronavirus pandemic? That's what the New York Times lists as the very first of its political priorities for black voters. What are black folks' political priorities? What's the first one? The coronavirus pandemic. Yeah, because black people's chief concern right now is getting that shot. That's the first concern that all black people have. Why, that's what every black person in America is talking about. When are they going to get us this coronavirus shot? I can't wait to line up for that shot. Now, there's been plenty of discussion, debate, and argument within the black community regarding the coronavirus and the vaccine for it. But what you don't hear is black people saying that we should be in mass, just lined up 50 million or so strong so that everybody can get the shot. Nobody's sitting here champing at the bit going, when are those damn hospitals going to be getting us our shot? That you haven't been hearing. You've been hearing skepticism. You've been hearing questions, doubts. You've been hearing a lot of things, but as far as the coronavirus goes, that hasn't been dominating black political discourse. What's been dominating it are tangibles. But the New York Times is attempting to say, well, this is what black people are most interested in. No, it sounds more like what white political circles are most interested in. And that's what this piece is meant to do. Very first thing that they mention ain't nothing about tangibles. They're not mentioning anything about punishing the police. First thing that they bring up, the coronavirus. The piece goes on to say, but they also raised issues that ran the gamut of liberal policy initiatives, from investing in small businesses and historically black colleges and universities to tackling student debt and climate change. Now, just understand something. We got about 5 or so things that they listed here: coronavirus, investing in small businesses, historic HBCUs, student debt, and climate change. And out of those 5 or so things, you notice how only one of them has anything to do with money. The rest of it's just going to be a sop to the HBCUs, which are becoming increasingly immigrant colleges and universities. This is basically a jobs program for the boule, for the bootlicks, for all of these would-be head Negroes in charge. It's so that Kamala Harris's fraternities and sorority chums, so they can have a place to work at. So they can sit around and pretend to themselves that they're shot callers and some sort, The only clowns who are interested in trying to prop up those HBCUs happen to be the roly-poly Martins and such. Those only idiots talking about that. Tackling student debt, black folks have been all but shut out of higher education, so the main ones who are impacted by student debt are white people. So they sit here and list things that are going to be advantageous to white people and tell you this is something that black people are very concerned about. This is just a trick bag. This is weasel words. Instead of they can't get away with saying the lift all boats crap. They know that that's dead in the world. That talking point's dead. So instead, it's a matter of, well, we're just not going to say that. We're not going to say that this is something that it must be something for everyone. We can't have something specifically for you. Instead, we're just going to list this and not mention, oh, this is for everybody else too. Student debt affects a very small number of black people because most black folks have been shut out of higher education. Though it does affect a number of black women, and that's how you can tell. That's a code word. That's some Lee Atwater stuff. Remember how there was that recording of Lee Atwater back in the 70s saying that you can use abstract terms like taxes and schools and such, and white people would know that you're talking about black folks, that these are policies meant to harm black people, but you could do it tactfully. It was a tactful way of saying this is what we're going to be doing against black folks. Well, that's what they're doing when they start bringing up stuff like student debt and such. It's supposed to be dog whistle language that, hey, black women, we know that a disproportionate number of black women have student debt. So that being the case, don't you want to make sure these Democrats are in power? Because they're going to allegedly do something for you. Don't worry about tangibles. Don't worry about reparations. Don't worry about what you're supposed to get. You can sell your soul for student debt forgiveness or for what have you. These are things that are of interest to white millennials. But they're trying to say that this is our political priorities. And, of course, climate change. So out of the 5 things that they listed, coronavirus, investing in small businesses, historically black colleges and universities, tackling student debt, and climate change, you have 2 of them which have to do with education. You have one of them, climate change, which is largely a hobby horse for the far left. And it does create business opportunities for them, but black folks ain't going to be part of that. And you got coronavirus, which happens to be basically the celebrity issue of the day. No mention of reparations, no mention of punishing the police, because apparently punishing the police is not a political priority for black people. Defunding the police, apparently black folks are not concerned about that, to hear the New York Times tell it, because they haven't mentioned it up until this point. So apparently black folks aren't concerned about these things. What are black people concerned about? We want to make sure the HBCUs, with their do-nothing would-be head Negroes in charge, these clowns get more money, and climate change. We're really concerned about climate change. Nothing about punishing the police, nothing about reparations. And this is the New York Slimes, the official paper of record, all the lies that are fit to print. These are the guys pushing this garbage. They want to make sure this is the line that gets out there. They are what Dr. Chomsky called the agenda-setting media. They set the frame for the rest of the media out there in the world. And what they're saying is, hey, we are giving ourselves permission here to no longer be mentioning all that stuff that those black empowerment types online have been saying, you don't mention that mess anymore. We're trying to steer them away from it. So anytime you bring up black people's political interests and priorities, go ahead and say coronavirus, say student debt, climate change, but we ain't talking about defunding the police. After all, we want to make sure that all of those casual racists, read white moderates, make sure that they're at ease, because after all, we need to bring more of them into the fold for the Democrats so they can be a counterweight against black people. We need as many non-black people as possible to get on board with the so-called left so that they can hopefully outweigh and shout down all these black folks and their concerns, because their concerns are too dangerous, too damning, too detrimental to white supremacy. Now, next in the piece, they quote Negro Jim Clyburn, who says, "What he's got to do, in my opinion, is to depart from the tradition. What is getting us in trouble in the past is when people get into office, they abandon the platform they ran on." In favor of appeasing Republicans, he said. Negro Jim Clyburn, well, he should know all about politicians abandoning black folks as soon as they get into office. He's been doing it since the 90s. Depart from tradition. Man, Jim Clyburn, he is the old, loyal, do-nothing Negro. He is the freaking epitome of the old Uncle Tom. That's who the hell Jim Clyburn is. Though I gotta admit, I'm getting a little bit confused, though, Because a few weeks ago, wasn't old Negro Jim telling everybody that defund the police were losses and races? I believe that Jamie Harrison, he lost because of defund the police. All that sloganizing loses elections. Now what he's saying is what's getting us in trouble is when people get into office and they abandon the platform they ran on. Well, what the hell is it, Negro Jim? See, he's all over the place. He says whatever he thinks is expedient for the interest of the Democratic Party, depending on who's standing in front of him. So let's go ahead and take a look at the propaganda technique that the New York Times have been trying up until this point in this piece. First of all, they start off with a false premise that there's only a few black folks in a few large cities who are unhappy and very outraged and angry with what the Democrats have been doing. Because black people are sometimes discarded after elections, not all the time. So they start off with minimizing black outrage. That's the premise. There's some black folks making some noise, but it ain't really much. It don't amount to much. Secondly, they completely and thoroughly lie about what black people's political interests are that they're so angry about. They list everything, only a few things that are actually of interest to white supremacy, and claim that this is what black folks are really concerned about. They're trying to dictate to us what our interests are. And then thirdly, they go ahead and prop up a few sock puppet, sellout, do-nothing Negroes like Negro Jim Clyburn. And you've seen that Reverend William Barber. He looks like freaking Fat Albert with a church shawl on. I ain't trying to take too many shots at the guy, but the thing about it is, if he's done much, I ain't seen it. But that's what they've done so far. Start off with a false premise, undergird the premise with a few lies about what black people's concerns are, and then you go ahead and have a few hand-picked Negroes, the usual suspects, who claim that they're going to say what black people really want. And then, now that you set that up, you've given yourself permission to depart from quoting any of your hand-picked puppets. I mean, you've laid the groundwork to now do what the New York Times really wanted to get to, what they really wanted to say. Here's a quote from the piece. In effect, they're talking about their hand-picked puppets here. They are asking President Biden to take a cue from candidate Biden. Man, nobody has said a damn word about candidate Biden. Candidate Biden was uninspiring, uninteresting. If he had been running against anyone other than Donald Trump, this would be the third time that Joe Biden lost a bid for the presidency. You cannot name any black people who are excited about or even interested in any of the non-committal gibberish that Joe Biden was talking. There were no black folks who were concerned about that. You can't name anything. You go up to any black folks you want and ask them, what planks of Joe Biden's policy platform are you most excited about? They can't tell you anything. What did Joe Biden run on? What did he say he was going to do? Nothing. He didn't say he was going to do anything. It's part of the reason why you got so many dumb Negroes out there saying, we ask him, why are you voting for Biden? He's not Trump. Yeah, because he didn't promise to do anything, so you can't name anything. So you might as well go ahead and say he's not Trump, because that's the only thing you got. See, the New York Times is trying to act as if candidate Biden was this sterling figure of political inspiration. But he'd made no promises of any benefit to black people. He made a few promises, of course, plenty of promises that are detrimental to us, but nothing that would be beneficial. And now you got the New York Times trying to patch up his image. The piece goes on to write, during the primary and general election and under pressure from activists who cast Mr. Biden as an artifact of the political past, they're talking about the black media, his team embraced a plan for black Americans called Lift Every Voice. In other words, just a rehash of the same old non-committal, unspecific, insincere, vague, fluff Democrat talking points where they take programs that are meant for everyone and claim, why, a few of you niggers are going to be able to sign up for some of these programs, so this is something for you too. Lift Every Voice, which would seek to close the black-white income gap. False, but we'll go ahead and let that slide. Expand educational opportunities, invest $70 billion in HBCUs, and reimagine the criminal justice system and policing. When it comes to policing, black folks did not say we want the criminal justice system reimagined. We said that we want the blatant violations of our rights to be punished. Police shoot black folks in the streets, they're supposed to go to prison for that. And I ain't talking about no penny any 5 years. They're supposed to do the hardest time there is. Black people who are behind bars are being treated like animals. They're either being put in solitary confinement, which is a form of mental torture. They're being beaten and often sexually assaulted by the so-called guards, who are nothing more than professional torturers in most cases. They have no air conditioning in the summer. They have no heat in the winter. They're being treated like animals, being denied their basic rights. This is not reimagining. This is just following the freaking law. And you see that neither candidate nor President-elect Biden has said anything about that. None of them have said, you know what, we've seen what's happened in Rikers Island. We've seen what's happened in Mississippi. So it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat city like New York or a Republican hellhole like Mississippi. We see what's going on both under Democrat and Republican administrations in the states, and we are not merely going to be pointing at it and going tisk tisk. We're going to be punishing the perpetrators of these crimes because these are crimes against humanity. Biden didn't say that, and that's the point. The point is he's going to be sitting here going, we'll put a commission together. A commission, yeah, we can have a commission that gives some do nothing make work for some of these bootlicks. Mostly for white people who are going to look and say, the criminal justice system in America is just fine. There's a couple of small things that could be tended to, but nobody needs to be punished. Don't need to be doing anything. Certainly no prosecutions or anything. That's what they're going to be doing. It's going to be nothing more than a cover-up, a pathetic little gesture that's meant to make you feel good, and then they can move on as if nothing had happened, because in truth, nothing has. Lift every voice indeed. And the topper, here's the doggone cherry on top of a feces-laden cake. But Mr. Biden repeatedly asserted that black communities would get special attention in his administration. Now, you heard that Zoom call, didn't you? You hear anything about special attention for the black community? He's never said special anything for black people. And Kamala Harris damn sure has said nothing special attention for black folks. She said exactly the opposite. You think I'm going to do something that only benefits black people? That would be giving y'all special attention. So the New York Slimes is just flat out lying. They're just lying. And clearly even they knew how ridiculous their words were sounding. They knew they had to shore up some of these lies because they knew that people's eyeballs would be rolling up into their heads. Black folks would be looking and going, man, even white liberals wouldn't buy this line of crap. So the next paragraph says, black political leaders believe that the biggest barrier to Mr. Biden's commitment to address systemic racism is his own instinct for compromise, bipartisanship, and deference to the idea of Washington civility. Now, that's actually double weasel words. That's two lies for the price of one. First of all, when you look at the three things that the New York Times piece lists as stuff that black people don't like, that black people feel is going to completely and thoroughly undermine Biden's alleged commitment to address systemic racism, considering that he's one of the systemic racists, I expect him to denounce himself, which he hasn't done, by the way, not even apologize for his 50 years of crimes against us, but some Negroes have told themselves that he did when he didn't. But look at the things that the New York Times lists, the three things that they mentioned. His instinct for compromise, bipartisanship, and deference to the idea of Washington civility. Now, those are three things that the white media never cast aspersions on or questions. In fact, these are things that the white media has been praising Joe Biden for. Why? We've had a president who is not compromised. Not true. Trump compromised on some stuff that would help white supremacy, only to the extent that instead of getting 100% of white supremacy, now you get 90% of it. And when you look at Biden's track record from the 86 Anti-Drug Abuse Act to the 94 Crime Bill, hell, he would have fit right in with the Trump administration. But compromise, which only goes one way. Black folks have to compromise on everything. These so-called alleged representatives for us, they compromise on anything. But the people who are standing for the interest of the dominant society, they never compromise on anything. Bipartisanship, which means we shake hands as we screw black people over. And deference to the idea of Washington civility. Yeah, we get in front of the cameras and act like we're really upset with each other. And then it's back to the Senate cloakroom for a 3-martini lunch, and then it's off to the golf course. But you will be seeing those terms: compromise, bipartisanship, and deference to the idea of Washington civility, returning civility to the Beltway. Washington's been a town frozen in gridlock, and we need some civility. The coarsening of the culture has reached the highest echelons of power, and Joe Biden represents a return to civility after 4 years of the orange man and his lunatic rantings and ravings. They're going to be taking Joe Biden, compromising on anything, even pretending to act on our behalf. He's going to be, oh, here's something that's supposed to be for black folks. The Republicans will say, take it, throw it out, Joe. You're not going to get it. He'll say, okay, good. I'm throwing it out. Whatever you guys want. Bipartisanship. Hey, Joe, shake our hand while we screw these niggers over. I like the good idea. Sounds good to me, too. And Washington civility, they all yuck it up in the back room while black folks are sitting here going, the bastards, they screwed us over again. But the white media is going to be holding these up as virtues. Why, this is the good thing about having Biden in the White House. Finally, some compromise. Yeah, because God knows black folks haven't compromised enough in this country. But I've been seeing the white media praising Biden for his unflagging, unwavering, slavish devotion to compromising. Only on things that might benefit black people. Bipartisanship. Let's write up a law that in order for us to get some money for these feminists over here, we're going to make sure that there's money to put more black people in prison. And Washington civility. Yeah, we know we got a bunch of blatant white supremacists running around. We're not going to be punishing any of them, not going to be doing anything about it. And we certainly won't call them out when they tell lies meant to cover up. Biden sitting here telling black folks that you can't question white people's motives. You can question their judgment, but not their motives. I know what the hell their motives are. And part of the problem is you're not calling them out on it. They're playing a game, and the game is, well, we don't want to endanger one another's job security. There must be civility on the Hill, you know. And if we all stick together, then nobody loses their congressional seat. Yep. It's the U.S. Congress, both the House and the Senate, against the rest of the country, specifically black people. And the New York Times is sitting here lauding this. They're laying the groundwork for it. So make no mistake, you as a black person, you read that and go, yeah, we're calling Joe Biden out on all his compromising and what he thinks of as bipartisanship and his Washington civility, which is just being very polite as they sell you out. But the white media is setting this up as black people are being unreasonable. See, this is not meant for a black audience. This is not meant for the consumption of a black audience. It's meant for the consumption of casual racists, read white moderates. Black people think that Joe Biden's commitment to compromise and bipartisanship and deference, it's going to be a problem. Well, it is for us, but the rest of them are looking and going, good, that's the kind of reassurance that we want. Because they know what compromise means. It means compromise on anything that might benefit black people. Bipartisanship, whatever idea you come up with, if black people pressure you to put something on the table that might actually benefit them, well, you're going to make sure to run it by the Republicans first and make sure that the casual racists, read white moderates, and these other non-black groups antagonistic towards us, make sure that they're fine with it first. Nothing gets passed that might benefit black people until everybody else has had a chance to chop it to ribbons and to shoot it down and make sure it gets blocked. That's what bipartisanship means. You better make sure that you raise your hand and ask permission first. Make sure that anything that black people want, you got to run it by all of their societal antagonists before you even think about bringing it up for discussion, much less a vote. That's what bipartisanship means. And Washington civility. You can question people's judgment, but don't question their motives, even when you think you know them. Long as we've been seeing these bastards on Capitol Hill, we know exactly what the hell their motives are. We know what the hell the bastards think. God knows we've had enough decades to analyze them. But that's what Washington civility means. What it means is you don't actually question people's motives. We all got to make nice here while we're screwing black folks over. And just in case you have any doubts about Biden's duplicity, or that this is all talk that's meant to curry the favor of and gain the confidence of all of those would-be Biden Republicans that Rahm Emanuel was holding out for, Ramsey Smith, a spokesman for the Biden transition team, said Bipartisanship is how the president-elect and vice president-elect plan to get things done from day one. They've made it abundantly clear that in order to combat the systemic inequities that Black Americans have faced for generations, it is imperative to work across the aisle and engage with all groups to reach a consensus that doesn't compromise our principles or priorities. Did you get that? How are you going to fight the systemic inequities that Black Americans have faced? They don't say racism, white supremacy. I want to hear them say racism. I want to hear them say racism, white supremacy, not systemic inequities. We're not talking about that there's not enough riveters on the line at the local GM plant. But look at what it is that they say. Bipartisanship is how you're going to get things done. Yeah, so you can go ahead. Anytime you propose something, you can run it by Mitch McConnell, because God knows Mitch McConnell has been helping to expedite anything that might be a benefit to Black people. Mitch McConnell's just been working day and night to make sure that Black folks' interests are promoted. Can you think of any legislation beneficial to Black people that's gotten by Mitch McConnell? Bipartisanship, what that means is you get to hide behind, there weren't enough Democrats to get it passed, and we had to go through the Republicans, and if we didn't do this, then we wouldn't have gotten anything at all. We had to compromise, or we wouldn't have gotten anything at all, and that's how things work on the Hill, and you niggers need to just be quiet now and just put up with it. We got over on you again, you just got to accept it. That's what that means. Bipartisanship indeed. But it's what they said, what this guy said at the bottom of his little statement that interested me the most. He said it is imperative to work across the aisle. That means make sure that Republicans are basically writing all of the legislation so Biden can turn around and say, well, what can I do? I couldn't stop him. Engage with all groups. Engage with all groups? So when it comes time to talk about the interests of LGBTs, nobody says, well, we got to talk to the hardcore Catholics and the religious right. Why? We can't be legalizing gay marriage without making sure that we reach a consensus. So before we can have gay marriage be the law of the land, we got to make sure that the religious right and the Catholics and the Muslims and everybody who thinks that marriage is between one man and one woman, we got to make sure we reach consensus on that. Hey, before we start talking about the DREAM Act and trying to legalize all of these illegal aliens, we got to make sure that we run it past every nativist and past every pro-borders activist and promoter out there. We got to make sure that we run it past them first. We got to reach a consensus. And just in case you don't know, the word consensus means a judgment that's arrived at by most of those concerned. That's what consensus means. So we got to get everybody to agree to it first. That's not what they told the gays. They didn't tell LGBTs that about gay marriage. They didn't tell that to the illegal aliens. Didn't say, well, we got to get a consensus first. We got to get everyone to agree to it first. But as soon as Black people show up and say it's time to deal with this racism, white supremacy, all of a sudden, well, we got to work across the aisle and we have to engage all groups. Because if we have any disagreement at all, if we have any group or constituency that has a problem with it, well, it's dead on arrival, buddy. We got to reach a consensus. Everyone has to agree on it before we can do anything for you. Because after all, we don't want anyone to be unhappy here. Well, except for Black people. If Black people are unhappy or displeased, well, that's okay. But this is about everybody else. It's not about Black people. We have to engage with all groups. That's right. We have to make sure that before we do anything that might even remotely benefit Black people, we got to make sure that it's agreed upon by every possible constituency, every single group out there, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, every flunky fool, every doggone nincompoop and ne'er-do-well, and every misfit and oddball out there has to agree to it first. And if any of them disagree, if any of them object, well, then that's the end of it. We just got to throw it in the trash can and forget about it and move on. Dr. Claude Anderson told you about that one. If you got a sheep surrounded by 3 hungry wolves, the sheep can demand all the votes he wants about what's for dinner. It's not going to change the outcome. Our tangibles and the punishment of those who harm us routinely, those things are far too important to be left up to the whimsy and to be left up to the opinions of other groups, especially groups who have proven that they are hostile towards us. This is a spokesman for Biden's transition team telling you that whatever you think that you might be able to pressure Biden for, he is blatantly telling you it's going to be held hostage to everybody else's concerns. Everybody gets to have a vote when it comes to anything that might benefit Black people. See, black people don't get to have veto power over anything for everyone else. Nobody says, well, before we can do anything for these other groups, we got to run it past the black community first. We have to reach a consensus. We must engage with all groups. Because after all, we don't want to compromise our principles or priorities. So they're telling you blatantly, this is no longer the black media. You can't say this is the black media saying it. You got a spokesperson for Biden saying it. We're going to have to, before we do anything for you niggers, we got to run it past everybody else first, starting with the Republicans. Then we're going to run it past the Latinos and the Asians and the other immigrant groups. And then we're going to run it past every other possible constituency and to see who objects. And if even one of them objects, well, that's going to be the end of the ball game right there. So in other words, the black agenda should be held hostage to the most hostile anti-black forces out there. That's what they're saying. So get ready to see Biden compromising, which will not be a compromise at all. It's just going to be him hiding behind the Republicans for all the things that he doesn't want to do. He's going to be claiming the things that he wants to do. He'll be claiming, well, you know, it's legal. We're on legal solid ground. Doesn't matter how much it gets challenged or how clearly invalid or illegitimate it is. If it's something that Biden, that means established power. If established power wants things to get done, then Biden's going to be saying, well, you know, it's legal. This is something I could do. We're on solid ground. And as for the other 99% of stuff that he doesn't want to do, he'll be blaming the Republicans, hiding behind them, claiming that, well, it wouldn't have stood legal muster anyway. That's what he's doing. And you got some black folks who are going to be pretending as if they don't know this. Why, you've got the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund president, a woman named Sherilyn Ifill, who says, we'll see if Biden's right, and we'll see very shortly. If he's not, we'll also see it very shortly. To which she added, it's perfectly fine to be hopeful, but certainly you should be fully prepared to pivot and to be effective. Now, she's talking about Biden on that one. At no point does the NAACP say what the consequences are going to be if Biden defies the black agenda. But then again, the NAACP, they're not spokespeople for the black agenda. They were invented by white supremacy as a mechanism of control and confinement for you and me. We sit on our hands and we hope that these do-nothing fossils are going to actually do something for us, when of course they're not going to do anything at all. Their job is to stand beside Biden or stand beside the Republicans and say, well, we're all one big happy family as a country, aren't we, right? Nobody actually believes that the Republicans are going to suddenly become sympathetic to anything that Biden says. This is all just meant to lay the groundwork for what he's not going to do. That's what this is meant to do. Oh, well, I was trying to take the high road. Well, except when it comes to black folks saying, well, you got to defund the police. Then all of a sudden, Biden's not saying, well, we got to have compromise. I know the Republicans will be against it, but there's got to be compromise, you know, somewhere between giving the police more money and giving them nothing. There's got to be a compromise. And the compromise is give the police less money. We got to reduce the money. But that's not going to be a compromise. Biden won't be sitting there saying, well, we got to compromise. Before we can give the police more money, we have to have a consensus first. We got to make sure that we run it by everyone, starting with black folks. Before we give the police that $300 million that I propose, we got to make sure that we have a consensus. Are black people fine with this? After all, we don't want to compromise our principles or priorities. I find that to be perversely amusing, though, that Ramsey Smith would use that phrase. We have to reach a consensus that doesn't compromise our principles or priorities, because the very thing that Biden promises he's going to do is he's going to be compromising. That's what bipartisanship means. What it means is we're going to be compromising left, right, and center. So we don't want to compromise while we're busy compromising. You see what word salad you run into with these idiots when you try to take them seriously? Now, I'm going to give a couple of other excerpts from this New York Times piece to close out our little examination of this one. The piece goes on to write that the stakes could not be higher. Black people sit at the intersection of the year's biggest political priorities: access to health care, criminal justice, and the climate change crisis. Black Americans have been ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic, dying, being hospitalized, and facing economic devastation at disproportionate rates. So basically, he mentions economic concerns at the very end of it, but only in relation to the coronavirus. So in other words, here goes that subtle pushing of the vaccine. You know, the coronavirus pandemic, black folks need to get that shot. If you promise to give black folks that shot, why, you're giving them tangible benefits. That vaccine shot's going to be tangible. Why, you don't even have to worry about reparations or nothing. Just make sure black folks get that shot. But you see, once again, when the New York Times pretends to be speaking for black folks about what are our priorities. Healthcare, that means the coronavirus vaccine shot. That's what that means. Criminal justice, but they don't specify that, and climate change. Black folks ain't been talking about getting the shot, and they ain't been talking about climate change. And criminal justice, well, we're not criminals, for starters, and second of all, this is about punishing the police. That's what we want. We want the police to be punished. But you notice of the three things that the writer mentions, when he goes into detail about it, he doesn't say anything about criminal justice at all. Instead, he just reiterates black Americans have been ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic. Not true, by the way. That's a total lie. Haven't been ravaged. Dying, being hospitalized. Well, that's been happening before the coronavirus. You didn't have to wait for that in order to see black folks dying from lack of health care. And facing economic devastation. Well, we were being economically devastated before coronavirus, but nothing about criminal justice. Notice how that got left out. That's deliberate. Now, finally, at the very bottom of this piece, they finally slip in what it is, I guess, that they were too terrified to say before. Reverend Holt, who was telling Biden that he was going to win, well, he made a political prediction. He said if Mr. Biden does not follow through on his promises to black people, does not make eroding systemic racism a priority in deed, not just words, Republicans will make gains with black voters. He cited the modest shift toward Mr. Trump in November's election among some black voters and the increasingly nonpartisan nature of younger black people. Those are warning signs, he said. The party system is not something that fits the black community as a whole. Mr. Holt said, we're tired of Democrats and we're tired of the two-party system. Now, that's not Mr. Holt speaking for himself. That's him speaking because of the young black folks who have been letting him know this is what's going on. This is where it's at and what it's got to be. Because the Mr. Holts and the Reverend Holts and such, these guys are freaking Democrat loyalists. It's those young people who have been letting him know we ain't listening to you anymore, and here's why. So this is him setting up a desperate white flag of surrender. I need some help out here. Y'all need to save me, because these young folks, they ain't falling for my con game. I can't tell them God wants y'all to vote for the Democrats because too many folks have died. They've gotten hip to that little scam, so y'all got to come and save me. That's what Holt is saying. What he's telling Biden is, I can't control these young black folks, because that's what he's talking about. Oh, and by the way, this whole garbage about black folks are going to be shifting Republican, no. What's just going to be happening is more and more black folks are going to be dropping out. The ones who don't drop out, they're going to be trying to see if they can get Republican support, which won't work. You got to be real careful with that white supremacist subtle urging in one direction or another, telling you, well, if you ain't going to vote for the Republicans, you got to vote for the Democrats. If you ain't going to vote for the Democrats, you got to vote for the Republicans. So what they're saying is go ahead and choose which corner of the white supremacist machine you want to be abused by. There is a third option, which is you disengage altogether. But this is what's coming down the pike, especially as we get closer to the inauguration. This is the white media going to be trying to say that all the stuff the white supremacy wants, well, these are things that black people want. The white media equivalent of the Jedi mind trick. Black folks over here talking about economic empowerment, getting our tangibles. We're talking about getting the bag and making sure the police get a prison cell. And here you got the white media coming along saying, no, what you want is a coronavirus vaccine. And you also want to make sure that Roly-Poly Martin and his foolish, idiotic friends at the HBCUs have a little bit more money. They need an infusion of cash so they can goof it off on cheap booze and hookers. That's what you're concerned about. That's what you guys are really concerned about. And why we have some NAACP sock puppet who's going to tell you that. That's the game that they're playing. And they're going to see if it has any traction. But as the New York Times piece is forced to have to admit, young black folks, they're increasingly disengaging. They ain't going for this garbage. Oh, no. See, it's the old black generation sitting there going, well, they going to vote Republican. No, I can come up with a scenario far more frightening and catastrophic than that. These young black folks drop out of this, just drop out altogether. And what that means is neither party is going to be able to play the game of, oh, you ain't got to take to the streets. You sure ain't got to raise no hell either. Why, you just got to vote for the other party. So be careful as you see more and more of these black bootlicks who are going to be giving you reasons for why Biden can't do this, can't do that. And they'll be claiming that, well, it's all the Republicans' fault. And, well, Biden, he's trying to return a tone of civility to Washington. They're going to be trying to find a way to lionize and ennoble what is nothing more than the same old white supremacist maneuvering against us. Oh, Biden hasn't sold you out. It's just a matter of the Republicans were unreasonable. Biden's trying to be the adult in the room. Expect to hear that garbage. Expect to hear, well, Biden wanted things, but the truth of the matter was there wasn't enough support, and it wasn't just Republicans, All of this talk about black tangibles, it's divisive. It's divisive, and it splits people. It's just divisive. That's Bernie Sanders talk. It's divisive. It's unfeasible. It's just unfeasible. Well, no matter what Reverend Holt says or any of these other pork chop preachers, no matter what the empty suits and the civil rights retreads over at the NAACP say, when it comes to our tangibles and to making sure that those who have harmed us are punished, that's not up for a vote. And the white media can try to put as pretty a face they want on Joe Biden's inevitable selling out of the very fools who chose to vote for him. But Joe Biden, he likes to compromise. But as we've always said here in the black media, black is the future, and the future is uncompromising.